Hi, and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review for Star Trek The Motion Picture. This video is the first in a weekly series of videos that I will be doing where I will review every single movie of Star Trek in the Star Trek franchise 1 week at a time. So each week I'll do a different movie. I am going in order, of course, starting with the first Star Trek movie, Star Trek The Motion Picture. So, it should go without saying that this video will contain spoilers for this movie, which is basically as old as I am. It's almost 40 years old. So, surely you have seen this movie by now. But anyway, so let me start with my personal experience with this movie. Because as I just said, I was literally a baby when this movie released, so I did not see it in the theater, and if my mother did take me to it, then I would remember because I was a baby. So I didn't actually see this movie until like much later in my life. When I was a teenager, I got into Star Trek 2, so I went back and I started watching all the Star Trek films. In fact, I marathoned them. It was up to 5 at that point because it was right before 6 had come out. So I'd marathoned all 5 Star Trek films. And I started with this one, which I thought was really boring. And in fact, I remember constantly getting in arguments with someone at school who would constantly say Star Trek 5 is the worst Star Trek film. And I'd be like, no, Star Trek The Motion Picture is the worst Star Trek film. Now that I'm older and wiser, I can see that he was right. Star Trek 5 is the worst, but I'll get to that later. But I still don't think very kindly on the motion picture. I tried to give it a shot, especially in more recent years. It's become kind of trendy to like this film. A lot of people actually say it's their best Star Trek film. When Carl Urban, who plays McCoy in the reboot Star Trek films, was being interviewed for Star Trek Beyond, he was asked what his favorite Star Trek film is, and he said Star Trek The Motion Picture. And I've actually heard a few people say that, and so it's kind of like a hipster thing, I think, to be like, ooh, Star Trek The Motion Picture is the best Star Trek film. I still don't think it's good. I think objectively speaking, that's a mess. I do see that there are things in it that can be appreciated, but I don't think it's good. Now, I did, even though I was a little baby when this movie came out, I did see it in the theaters because I was living in Portland, where there's this theater that used to play older movies from time to time. And I remember I went out to that theater because we used to go there because we can get beer and stuff. I went out with my wife at the time, and we went to see Insomnia, which was the Christopher Nolan film, which would disappoint me. But anyway, that was sold out, so we couldn't see it. So we were thinking, oh, what else is playing? Everything was sold out except for this movie, Star Trek The Motion Picture, because they had one movie that was old playing all the time where the others were new releases. And it just happened to be Star Trek The Motion Picture this week. It was for 80s week, but this movie came out in December 1979, so it's not an 80s movie technically, but whatever. Anyway, so it was either this or Powerpuff Girls, and I elected to see this. I think I probably should have saw Powerpuff Girls because I had already seen it like a couple billion times, or a dozen times at least, by this stage. But my wife at the time hadn't seen it, so I thought, oh, that would be cool. She'd be able to see it for the first time on the big screen. And she's not happy with me. She thinks we should have saw Powerpuff Girls instead, or just gone home and gone to Insomnia the other night because she felt this movie was incredibly boring. And when I watched it on the big screen, I was thinking that this is a boring movie. I was in the mindset, it's like, all these people say it's good, so let's give it another shot. It might be better than what I remember it. Nah, it's not. Now, before I get more into that, let me get into some of the actual history involving this film, because, Star Trek, the original series, went off the air in '69 because it wasn't getting enough ratings, but after it went off the air, they realized that there was a very highly devoted fan base to it, and it actually, the NBC realized when they looked at the demographics that the show was successful in its own way, and they should have kept it going. But they had it go on syndication, and it was like a smash hit in syndication, like the reruns. of the original series, so it gathered steam throughout the 70s and became even more popular by the mid 70s than it ever was when it was actually airing. So talk kept thing. We had, well, this properties is popular and there are conventions for it. There's a thirst for this material, so we want to bring it back. So originally, in like around 75, 76, they were going to bring it back as a B movie called Planet of the Titans, I believe it was called. But then that never came to pass because Paramount was like, well, maybe this should be a TV show again. And they kept apparently going back and forth between TV show and movie. And then finally they came up with the idea to do Phase 2. And now Phase 2 would be the second Star Trek show. We'd get back all the main characters except for Leonard Nimoy, who was refusing to return. So they wrote in another Vulcan character named Zahn and another first officer named William Decker, and as well as a new character, Lieutenant Ayala. So they were in pre-production for Phase 2. They had scripts written. They cast the characters, like they cast this guy Zahn, and they did like screen tests, and they were like really like getting ready to write, to produce, to make this TV show. Now it was supposed to launch the new Paramount network, but that never came to pass. So it's questionable to say whether or not this show would have came to pass, because that network never came to pass until 1995 when Star Trek Voyager launched that, and apparently that network failed eventually anyway. But so apparently, while they were in production for Phase 2, they had a screen test or a meeting with the high-up execs, and they pitched the story idea for the pilot episode, which is going to be called In Thy Image, I believe. And when the big high-ups heard this premise, they're like, that's it. That's our movie. That's the movie we've been looking for. And so they decided to make it as the movie. And apparently, like, this was 78, so right after, or 77, 78, so right after that, Star Wars was a huge hit. So it made them look even more fondly at the possibility of doing a Star Trek movie, because before Star Wars came out, they thought, oh, there's not really a market for this kind of sci-fi. But after Star Wars came out, instead of it being a B movie, they were going to make it a really, smash Hollywood hit. So they were looking at a lot of different directors, like high-class directors, to do this film. They were looking, apparently, even at Steven Spielberg. Now, you have to remember, this is like 78, so he had just finished Close Encounters of the Third Kind, and it's pretty much that and Jaws were like the only movies he did, so he's not the big name now. He wasn't the big name then that he was now. So I really wish that they would have gotten Steven Spielberg to do this. I wonder what it could have been. I think it could have been way better. Not that I don't like Bob Weiss, but I think Steven Spielberg would have brought what they were looking for. They were looking for a Star Wars movie, but Bob Weiss came on and he did a 2001 movie instead. But I'll get more into that a bit later. So they saw the script for the pilot episode, but the script was kind of not totally complete. In fact, a lot of accounts of this filming of Star Trek: The Motion Picture, they had 2/3 of the script written. And there's a hallmark of the film, and I think this is an important thing to know, even though I didn't know this logically in my head when I saw this movie a dozen times when I was a teenager, in my early 20s and whatnot. But it's really evident, and it makes total sense now looking back on it, that this film was incredibly rushed. In fact, you look at the production of this film, it is a classic case. It's a classic example of why films should not be rushed. I know there are other films out there that are, rushed, Batman v Superman or whatever. But this is a classic example of them. Well, they set themselves this arbitrary deadline because they want to compete with Star Wars. And it was unrealistic, and there was literally no way for them to meet this deadline. And so they only had 2/3 of the script written. And so you can tell that a lot of the first and second acts of this film is really dragged out. It's just like, here's introduction to the character, because they weren't sure exactly where they were going to take the story. Like, they knew the twist. the twist ending, because that was integral to the story concept for the pilot episode of Phase 2, but they didn't know exactly how they were going to get there or what they were going to do. So I think this shows a lot in the film. That's why I would disagree with these hipsters who say that the motion picture is the best Star Trek film, because I think, objectively speaking, it's a bad film. Because it was not, you can tell there was a lot of production issues and a lot of stalling and a lot of pacing issues with the film. So, if you watch the special features, you see William Shatner was recounting how he was like pitching the ending to the motion picture while they were filming, because apparently they were like in the middle of filming and coming up on the ending, and they still hadn't have written the end of the script. And that's unheard of. That's just nonsense. And so William Shatner was pitching the ending. Apparently they didn't go with his pitch because he's a bit William Shatner. But anyway, they had written, how the Enterprise was just being a refit. In fact, a lot of the first part of the film has to do with how the Enterprise is not ready. Like, this people die in a transporter accident, like just beaming to and from Earth. I think that's a bit ridiculous. And Decker constantly berates Kirk for not knowing the ship and saying that the ship's not ready. They go get trapped in this wormhole because the warp engines weren't ready. So that's a major part of the first half of the film, and apparently that was only written in there because they weren't sure that they'd be able to finish the sets in time to meet filming. So they said, let's just say that the ship's being constructed, so just in case there's half-built sets or anything like that, that would be our excuse. So that that would be our excuse. You can say, it's in construction, so that's why these sets look like they're in construction. But the sets actually ended up looking fine. But really, it's just a contribution to how incredibly rushed, and so that's why that first part meanders a lot and it focuses a lot on the ship being not ready to go and reconstructive, because they didn't really know what they were doing. They did not have a completed script, so they were just throwing a bunch of shit in there. I think that really shows. Now, getting back to Robert Weiss. Now, I had not heard of this director. In fact, not even all the way up until recently, I didn't realize how big of a director he is, because I looked up his IMDb. He has done films like The West Side Story, The Sound of Music, which that's quite huge, and he was directing films from 1940s. So he's quite like a classic director, actually. And he did the Andromeda Strain. In fact, Star Trek The Motion Picture is towards the end of his career, because after this he only directed 2 movies. One was a decade later, and the other was a decade after that. That was a TV film. So he did 2 films decades apart. So he was kind of retired, but just did these films. So this is towards the end of his career, and as I said, this is when I was being born. So this director, by all accounts, was before my time. And that's why I wasn't aware that he was actually a huge deal. This is a big screen name. It's like getting, say, Quentin Tarantino to direct a Star Trek film. Nowadays, it's kind of, well, maybe not exactly, but it's kind of that equivalent where you have this big name to come in and direct it. So it was a big deal. And I didn't realize that until recently, that he was a big name. Now, I don't think he was as big of a name as, say, Steven Spielberg is today. So if Steven Spielberg, they didn't realize this at the time, they went with Bob Weiss probably because he was the bigger name, but if they would have went with Steven Spielberg, it would have made the movie more classic. People would be looking at that more in Spielberg because he's more revered now, but whatever. Anyway, Bob Weiss, I think he kind of saved and he hurt this movie at the same time, if you know what I mean, because this film was a disaster. The script, and they were just rushing production, and the way it managed to turn out as good as it did is a testament to Robert Weiss, and I can tell that's because he's sort of expert director and he had a very clear vision. Issue is, the vision that he had doesn't really fit with Star Trek, and again, we'll make Tarantino comparisons, whatever you like, but I actually want Tarantino to direct. But anyway, Off topic. So, so Bob Weiss, the vision he looked at the script, which wasn't quite complete, and it was very vague, and it didn't have a lot of meat to it. It didn't have a lot of story to it. It was just like concepts and ideas. So he looked at that. So he saw a special effects heavy film that didn't focus on characters. It focused more on the special effects and the spectacle. So that's why he saw 2001. He saw a 2001 Space Odyssey type film because the script was not developed very well. I'm not saying it was a bad script. It was just early stages. They needed more time to complete it, for example, and actually have a complete script would have helped. And just go over and do more drafts of it, and I think that was, I haven't seen the script myself, but I'm just guessing off of what I heard, what I've seen, that this is why. Now this is all guess. I should make that clear. It's all speculation. I don't know for a fact that Bob Weiss did this, all the script and said, but that's my guess. Seeing of what he did with the final product, I would say that he probably looked at this poorly written script that didn't have much characters. It was all about like story and spectacle and didn't have much there. So that's why he focused on it. Now that's a detriment. As I said, it helps and it hurts the film simultaneously. Because in one case, like even regarding the fact that this is totally the wrong tone for Star Trek. I know a lot of people say that today with Discovery and the reboot films and stuff like that, but talking about this here has a totally different meaning, because at this time, the Star Trek was only the original series. So you had the animated series as well, but no one really paid much attention to that. And that's pretty similar to the original series anyway, so pointless. Anyway, so basically you just have the original series. That's all you have to go off of. And the original series had a tone that the motion picture did not capture, and I think that's why a lot of fans went away disappointed. Now, to be clear, this film was very successful. It made a lot of money, but it didn't get a positive audience response. And so a lot of people came into Star Trek 2 being skeptical, but then that movie actually did save the franchise because it had and I'll get more into Star Trek 2 next week, of course, but it had that classic feel, the classic tone of Star Trek. It wasn't exactly the same. It was modernized for the 80s and updated and injected with some new material, but it captured what people liked about the original series, whereas this film did not. It did not at all, because that's not what Weiss saw in the script. He saw, because Star Trek has always been about, even the original series, strong characters and relying on this character dynamic, and that's what this film totally lacks. And it's a slow paced skeptical. It's all about the shots. Maybe that's why some of the hipsters say they like it. It was all about these slow paced like special effects shots, and this fancy cinematography and the music and blending. It has a 2001 feel, but it's not even as good as 2001 because, as I said, the production was rushed and everything was so rushed, and it doesn't really come together as it did. Now, I think this movie could have been a lot worse, as I said, and I think it is a testament to what a good director Bob Weiss is. But even that, the movie itself is this story. I think there was a reason why it was the pilot episode. I think having this a pilot episode would have worked, but so I totally disagree with that exec who said, "Ooh, this is a movie," because I think that's an issue, that there's obviously not enough story to fill out a movie, and I think Bob Weiss saw that, and that's why he added in all these slow-paced special effects things that last 10 like that scene when Kirk and Scotty are going to the Enterprise, and it's literally no exaggeration, 10 minutes long. It's just them flying around the Enterprise going da 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 da. That is outrageous. I'm like, this is the most ridiculous thing. And I know some people, the hipsters, would never be, oh, that's artsy. And it's not. It's boring, and it's not necessary, and it's just dragged out. So it's so obvious the whole story is just one good idea that could have made like a 45-minute story dragged out ridiculous. And when you watch the film, that's extremely evident. It's extremely evident that there's a lot of production issues. It's extremely evident that it was rushed. But I will say that the ending was great. And that's why I think this would have made a really great pilot episode, or any episode would have made a really great 45-minute story if it was condensed. They cut off all this unnecessary fat, all the slow-paced action, looking at lights. Ooh, look at the lights. Like, that is never what Star Trek was, before or after. And so Bob Weiss, I think he's a good director, but he didn't understand Star Trek, and he was just going off the script he saw, which was not finished. But anyway, so yeah, that ending was great. That ending was very Star Trek-like. It was. I actually still hold that ending in high regard with, Decker merging with V'ger, and the whole reveal that V'ger was the Voyager 6 probe. That was an amazing reveal, and so that was actually the concept of the story as described for the pilot. And that was a very good concept. You take that concept and you condense it and have it more punchy, have it more character-based, then you would have an awesome episode. The movie, as it stands, is bloated. It's very poorly paced by anyone's definition. It's got great music, it's got great directing, but the acting, and this is another thing why this is the wrong tone for Star Trek, because even stuff like Discovery or Enterprise or whatever, you can see that they have that kind of tone, but with here, they have like this specific like artsy movie tone where all the actors and stuff are subdued, like all the dialogue, even like McCoy when he's like rah, 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 that even seems subdued compared to the way you see McCoy and other things. But all the other, like, you can tell, like, even the extras who have one line of dialogue or something, they're like, oh, look, it's on a screen. Now, your initial thought is they're a bad actor, but they're actually not. I'm sure they were directed to act that way because that is the tone that the whole film, even the characters we're familiar with, they're very subdued, they talk very quietly, and they have minimal dialogue, and so that was like the style that Weiss was going for, which I just did not think worked for Star Trek. But regardless of me not liking the style, it's obvious that from an objective standpoint, the film was very poorly paced, and it was not, you can tell that it was not constructed well, and that they didn't really have a clear plan on what to do. It was extremely evident. And apparently Roddenberry was responsible for a lot of that, and that's why he got kicked off the future Star Trek films, which actually worked out very good. So you can take that for what it's worth. So anyway, my rating for Star Trek The Motion Picture out of 10 is a 3. Very poor. Now, yeah, it's not a 1, so I think like that ending is really great, and I do love the ending, but it's not, to me, it's not enough to make this a great film or to even make it a good film, because the rest of the film around it doesn't work. Like you can like cut out, as I say, you can like the film as is, you can like jump in like an hour and a half through and start watching it, and you won't miss a damn thing. And it'll probably even be a better experience for you. And it just would have been so much better if it was a 45-minute episode that was condensed, that was smart, more character-based, more a lively dialogue, not so subdued. And not just for Star Trek, but for anything, really. It's just poorly constructed. Anyway, that is it for my review for Star Trek The Motion Picture. I will be back with more reviews for future Star Trek movies. I'm going to review every Star Trek movie 1 week at a time, so I'll be back next week for Star Trek II The Wrath of Khan. Thank you so much for watching. Keep an eye out on my channel for all that, as well as I do other videos and other shows like Game of Thrones, The Expanse, Babylon 5, and more. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that. And thanks a lot for watching.